Princese pinned me to the wall, seen into my eyes, and whispered, "You'reI want, human." I froze. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the massive crystal platform, looking up at the Zephyrian royal palace. The building stretched high into the purple sky, its walls made of some kind of shimmering metal that changed colors in the alien sunlight. He had never seen anything like it in his 32 years of life. "Remember, Commander," said Ambassador Chen, adjusting her formal diplomatic uniform, "these people can read minds. They've been the most powerful species in this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. We need to make a good first impression." Jake nodded, though he felt nervous butterflies in his stomach. This was humanity's first official contact with the Zephyrian Empire. Everything had to go perfectly. Earth had only discovered faster than light travel 5 years ago, and they were still the new kids in the galactic neighborhood. The palace doors opened without anyone touching them. Jake guessed it was some kind of telepathic control. A tall, elegant Zephyrian stepped forward to greet them. The alien had pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to look right through him. The smaller antennae-like structures moved slightly on top of its head. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the Zephyrian said in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. The words seemed to appear directly in Jake's head. "I am Minister Valdris. His Royal Majesty awaits your presence in the Great Hall." Jake followed Ambassador Chen and the rest of the human delegation through corridors filled with floating lights and walls that showed moving pictures of distant worlds. Everything felt strange and wonderful at the same time. The Great Hall was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, and hundreds of Zephyrians stood in perfect rows along the walls. They all wore flowing robes in different shades of blue and silver. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the Emperor on a throne that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. But Jake's attention was caught by someone else. Standing to the right of the throne was a young Zephyrian woman. She wore a crown of thin silver metal that curved around her head like frozen lightning. Her robes were deep purple, and unlike the other Zephyrians who kept their eyes lowered, she stared directly at the human delegation. "That must be Princess You'reI," whispered Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's cultural expert. "She's the Emperor's daughter and heir to the throne. They say she's one of the most powerful telepaths in their history." Jake felt something strange when he looked at the princess. It was like a gentle pressure in his head, as if someone was trying to push open a door that wouldn't budge. The feeling was not painful, just odd. The formal ceremony began. Ambassador Chen presented gifts from Earth and spoke about friendship between their peoples. The Emperor responded with words about mutual respect and learning from each other. Jake tried to pay attention, but he kept noticing that Princess You'reI was staring at him. Her large, dark eyes never seemed to blink. There was something in her expression that Jake couldn't understand. She looked confused, maybe even worried. Every few minutes, he felt that strange pressure in his head again, like someone tapping on glass. After the ceremony ended, the humans were invited to a reception in a smaller hall. The room was filled with floating tables that held strange but delicious-looking food. Zephyrian nobles moved between the tables, speaking in their melodic language. Jake stood near a wall, holding a cup of something that tasted like sweet starlight. He was trying to make sense of the cultural notes Dr. Kim had given him, when he noticed Princess You'reI walking toward him. She moved differently than the other Zephyrians. While they seemed to glide smoothly across the floor, she walked with quick, determined steps. The other nobles moved out of her way without even looking at her, as if they sensed her approach before seeing her. "Commander Morrison," she said, stopping in front of him. Her voice was soft but had an edge to it that made Jake stand up straighter. "Your Highness," Jake replied, giving what he hoped was an appropriate bow. "I need to speak with you," she said, glancing around the room, privately. Before Jake could respond, she turned and walked toward a corridor that led away from the main reception area. Jake looked around for Ambassador Chen, but she was deep in conversation with Minister Valdris on the other side of the room. Jake followed the princess down the corridor. The walls here were plain metal, and the only light came from small crystals embedded in the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed in the quiet space. The princess stopped suddenly and turned to face him. In the dim light, her skin seemed to glow with a faint blue radiance. "Something is wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Wrong? What do you mean?" Jake asked. Instead of answering, Princess You'reI stepped closer to him. Before Jake could react, she reached out and placed her hands on his shoulders. With surprising strength, she pushed him back against the corridor wall. Jake's heart started beating faster. The princess was standing very close to him now, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns carved into her silver crown. Her dark eyes stared directly into his, and Jake felt that strange pressure in his head again. Much stronger this time. "You're what I want, human," she whispered. Her voice intense and desperate. Jake froze. The words didn't make sense. The princess was heir to the most powerful empire in the galaxy. What could she possibly want from him? But as she continued to stare into his eyes, Jake began to understand. The pressure in his head wasn't random. She was trying to do something to his mind, something that clearly wasn't working the way she expected. Her eyes widened with what looked like frustration and growing alarm. She pressed her hands more firmly against his shoulders and leaned even closer. "How is this possible?" she whispered to herself. Jake heard footsteps echoing from the direction of the reception hall. The princess heard them too and quickly stepped away from him. She smoothed down her robes and composed her expression. But Jake could see that her hands were shaking slightly. "We will speak again, Commander Morrison," she said in her normal voice. "Soon." She walked quickly back toward the reception, leaving Jake standing alone in the corridor, trying to figure out what had just happened. Two Zephyrian guards appeared at the far end of the corridor, their eyes scanning the area with professional alertness. Jake straightened his uniform and walked back toward the reception, his mind racing with questions. What had the princess been trying to do to him? Why had she seemed so desperate? And why did he have the feeling that this strange encounter was going to change everything? Jake couldn't sleep that night. The human delegation had been given guest rooms in the palace's east wing, and his room was comfortable enough. The bed was soft, the temperature was perfect, and the walls showed peaceful images of Earth's oceans. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Princess You'reI's face and heard her desperate whisper. He got up and walked to the window. The palace garden stretched out below him, filled with plants that glowed softly in the darkness. Two moons hung in the purple sky, casting silver light on everything. A soft knock at his door made him turn around. "Commander Morrison," came a quiet voice from the corridor. Jake opened the door carefully. A young Zephyrian servant stood outside, wearing simple gray robes. The alien looked nervous and kept glancing down the empty hallway. "Princess You'reI wishes to see you," the servant whispered. "Please follow me, but be very quiet." Jake hesitated. This felt dangerous. If Ambassador Chen found out he was sneaking around the palace at night, she would not be happy. But his curiosity was stronger than his caution. "All right," he said softly. "Lead the way." The servant led him through corridors Jake had never seen before. They walked down spiral staircases and through rooms filled with strange machines that hummed quietly in the darkness. Finally, they stopped at a small door hidden behind a tapestry. "The princess waits inside," the servant said, then hurried away. Jake pushed open the door and found himself in a circular room with walls covered in books and glowing charts. Princess You'reI sat at a desk in the center, still wearing her formal robes but without her crown. She looked up when he entered. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Please, sit down. We have much to discuss." Jake sat in a chair across from her desk, in the soft light of the room. He could see that she looked tired and worried. "Your Highness." "What's this about?" he asked. "What happened in the corridor today?" Princess You'reI was quiet for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "Commander Morrison, how much do you know about telepathy?" she finally asked. "Not much," Jake admitted. "We know your people can read minds and communicate without speaking. Humans don't have those abilities. It's more than that," the princess said. "For my people, telepathy is everything. We use it to share knowledge, to understand emotions, to know if someone is telling the truth. Our entire society is built on the ability to connect minds. She stood up and walked to one of the charts on the wall. It showed a map of the galaxy, with different colored dots marking various star systems. Every species we have met in the past 1,000 years has some level of telepathic ability. She continued, some are stronger than others, but all of them can be reached through mental connection. Jake began to understand, but not humans. Exactly. Princess HFY turned back to him, her dark eyes intense. When I tried to read your mind today, it was like trying to see through solid metal. I have never encountered anything like it. Is that why you seem so surprised? Surprised and frightened, she said. Commander Morrison, you and your people are the first beings we have met who are completely immune to telepathic contact. Do you understand what this means? Jake thought about it. It means we're different. But is that necessarily bad? Princess HFY sat back down at her desk. She opened a drawer and pulled out a small, dark crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. This, she said, holding up the crystal, is why I need your help. Jake leaned forward to get a better look. The crystal was about the size of his thumb and felt wrong somehow. Like looking at it made his eyes water. 3 months ago, our scientists discovered this crystal on a dead world. At the edge of our territory, Princess HFY explained that, first, we thought it was just an unusual mineral. But when our telepaths tried to study it, strange things began to happen. What kind of strange things? The researchers started acting differently. They became quiet and distant. They stopped sharing their thoughts with others, which is very unusual for my people. Then we noticed that other Zephyrians who spent time near these researchers also began to change. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Change how? They lost their individuality. Princess HFY said quietly. Slowly, one by one, they stopped being themselves. Their thoughts became empty, hollow, as if something else was thinking for them. She set the crystal back on the desk. But Jake noticed she was careful not to touch it directly. We call it the Void Whisper, she continued. It spreads through telepathic contact, jumping from mind to mind. Once it takes hold, the person is no longer truly alive. They become part of something else, something hungry and cold. Jake stared at the dark crystal. How many people has it infected? We don't know, Princess HFY admitted. That's the terrifying part. The infected individuals act normal most of the time. They perform their duties. They speak when spoken to. But there's nothing behind their eyes. And we can't tell who's been taken because the Void Whisper has learned to hide itself from our telepathic senses. But why are you telling me this? Jake asked. What can I do about it? Princess HFY leaned forward, her expression desperate. Because you're immune, Commander Morrison. You and your people can't be infected by the Void Whisper. Because it needs telepathic contact to spread. More importantly, you might be able to identify the infected individuals. How? Humans have something we lack, she explained. You read emotions through facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. You notice small details that we miss because we rely on telepathy. The infected tried to act normal, but they're not perfect at mimicking real emotions. Jake was beginning to understand the scope of what she was asking. You want me to help you find the infected people in your society? Yes, Princess HFY said, but it's more urgent than you realize. The infection has spread to members of the royal court. I believe some of our most important leaders may already be compromised, including your father, Princess HFY's face went pale. I don't know. I hope not, but I can't be sure. The Void Whisper is cunning. It's learning to hide better with each person it takes. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Through the glass, he could see the palace gardens, peaceful and beautiful in the moonlight. But now he wondered how many of the servants and guards walking those paths were still truly alive. If this is true, he said slowly, then your entire empire could be in danger. Not just our empire, Princess HFY replied. The Void Whisper isn't satisfied with just taking individual minds. I believe it wants to merge all consciousness into one collective entity, with itself as the controller. If it succeeds here, it will spread to other worlds, other species. She stood up and joined him at the window. Commander Morrison, Your people's immunity to telepathy might be the only thing that can save not just the Zephyrian Empire, but the entire galaxy. Jake looked at her reflection in the glass. The weight of what she was asking seemed impossible. What do you need me to do? The next morning came too soon for Jake. He sat at breakfast with the other members of the human delegation, trying to act normal while his mind raced with everything Princess HFY had told him. Ambassador Chen was discussing trade agreements with Dr. Kim, but Jake could barely focus on their words. You look tired, Commander, observed Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, the team's security officer. Everything all right? Just having trouble sleeping in a new place, Jake lied, stirring his strange alien breakfast that tasted like sweet flowers. What he didn't tell her was that he had spent the rest of the night learning how to identify the Void Whisper's victims. Princess HFY had shown him recordings of infected Zephyrians, teaching him to spot the subtle signs that their telepathic society missed. The infected moved differently. Their gestures were too perfect, too measured. When they spoke, they paused just a fraction too long before responding, as if waiting for instructions. Most importantly, their eyes never showed real emotion, even when they smiled or frowned. Today we'll be touring the government districts, Ambassador Chen announced. Minister Valdris will show us how their administrative system works. It's a great opportunity to learn about their society. Jake nodded, but he knew this tour would be more dangerous than the ambassador realized. According to Princess HFY, several key government officials might already be infected. An hour later, they were walking through the massive government complex. The building was even larger than the palace, with towers that stretched high into the clouds. Minister Valdris led them through corridors filled with busy Zephyrian workers. Our efficiency comes from telepathic coordination, Minister Valdris explained as they walked. Each department can share information instantly, without the need for slow verbal communication. Jake watched the workers carefully. Most of them seemed normal, but something bothered him about a group of officials they passed near the central administration office. Their movements were too synchronized. Like dancers who had practiced the same routine many times, he caught Princess HFY's eye across the group. She had joined the tour as part of her royal duties, and gave him a small nod. She had seen it too. During lunch, Jake excused himself to use the restroom. Instead, he slipped away to meet Princess HFY in a small storage room they had agreed upon. The central administration building, he said as soon as the door closed. At least 6 of the officials we saw this morning are infected. Princess HFY's face went pale. Are you certain? Their eye movements were wrong, Jake explained. When normal people listen to someone speak, their eyes move naturally, following sounds and processing information. The infected ones stared straight ahead, like they were listening to something else entirely. The Void Whisper's instructions, Princess HFY whispered. If the central administration is compromised, then it has access to all government communications and decisions. A soft chime echoed through the building, signaling the end of lunch period. They could hear footsteps in the corridor outside. We need to investigate further, Princess HFY said. Tonight, after your delegation is asleep, can you meet me in the palace archives? Jake nodded, but before he could respond, the storage room door opened. Minister Valdris stood in the doorway, his dark eyes staring at them without blinking. Behind him were 2 palace guards, their faces completely expressionless. Your Highness, Minister Valdris said in a voice that sounded too calm. You were not scheduled to be in this area. Jake felt his heart racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. He remembered Princess HFY's warning that the infected were always watching, always listening. I was showing Commander Morrison some historical documents, Princess HFY replied smoothly. He expressed interest in our record-keeping methods. Minister Valdris tilted his head slightly, like a bird studying an insect. How interesting. Perhaps Commander Morrison would like to see our main data storage facility as well. There was something in the way he said it that made Jake's skin crawl. It wasn't really an invitation. That would be fascinating, Jake said, hoping his voice sounded casual. But I should return to my group now. Ambassador Chen will be wondering where I am. Minister Valdres stared at him for a long moment, then stepped aside to let them pass. As Jake walked by, he noticed that the minister's eyes didn't track his movement naturally. They remained fixed on a point in the distance, as if watching something invisible. The rest of the afternoon tour passed without incident, but Jake felt like he was being watched constantly every time he looked around. He spotted Zephyrian officials or guards, whose movements seemed just a little too perfect, a little too coordinated. That evening, Jake waited until he was sure the other humans were asleep before sneaking out of his room. The palace felt different at night, the floating lights were dimmed, and the corridors seemed to stretch on forever. He made his way to the archives using the route Princess You'reI had described. The room was enormous, filled with glowing data crystals that stored thousands of years of Zephyrian history. Princess You'reI was waiting for him near a reading, stationed in the center of the room. "We have a problem," she said without greeting. "I've been analyzing the government records, and the infection is spreading faster than we thought." She activated a holographic display that showed the palace and government complex from above. Red dots marked the locations of suspected infected individuals. "Look at this pattern," she said, pointing to clusters of red dots. "The Void Whisper isn't spreading randomly. It's targeting specific positions of power and influence." Jake studied the display. "It's building a network, taking control of key people who can influence others." "Exactly, and there's worse news." Princess You'reI's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think it knows we're onto it." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the archive door suddenly sealed shut with a heavy metallic sound. Emergency lights began flashing, and an alarm started blaring. Throughout the palace, "Intruder alert," announced a mechanical voice. Unauthorized access detected in the royal archives. Security teams respond immediately. Princess You'reI grabbed Jake's arm. "This isn't a coincidence. Someone triggered this alarm deliberately." Through the archive's transparent walls, Jake could see palace guards running through the corridors, but their movements were too perfectly coordinated, and their faces showed no emotion despite the emergency situation. "They're all infected." Princess You'reI breathed. "The entire security force?" Jake looked around the archives, searching for another exit. The room had only one door, and it was sealed shut. They were trapped. "Your Highness," came Minister Valdres's voice from outside the door. "Please open the archives. There has been a security breach, and we need to ensure your safety." Princess You'reI looked at Jake with fear in her eyes. "He knows we're here. They're going to take us." Jake's mind raced, trying to think of a solution. Then he remembered something from his military training back on Earth. Sometimes the best way out of a trap was to create a bigger problem for your enemies. "Do these archives contain important government data?" he asked quickly. "Yes." "Centuries of records. Why?" Jake moved to the central control panel. "Because sometimes you have to break something to save it." He started typing commands into the system, using his basic knowledge of computer networks. If he could trigger a system-wide data backup protocol, it might create enough chaos to cover their escape. The pounding on the archive door grew louder. Soon, they would break through. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," Princess You'reI said, her voice tight with fear. Jake's fingers flew over the controls, hoping his desperate plan would work. Jake's fingers moved quickly across the control panel. As the pounding on the archive door grew louder, the system responded to his commands, and suddenly every data crystal in the massive room began glowing brightly. "Emergency backup protocol activated," announced the archive's computer voice. "All data streams redirecting to secondary storage. Estimated completion time, 47 minutes. The entire palace's computer network began working at maximum capacity to process the backup. Lights flickered throughout the building, and Jake could hear confused voices echoing from the corridors outside. "Brilliant," Princess You'reI whispered. "The system overload will disable the door locks." Sure enough, the sealed archive door clicked open as its electronic locks lost power. But instead of freedom, they faced a new problem. Minister Valdres stood in the doorway with 6 palace guards, all of them staring with those empty, emotionless eyes. "Step away from the controls, Commander Morrison," Minister Valdres said in his too calm voice. You are interfering with important systems, Jake. Step protectively in front of Princess Lyrale. Just trying to learn about your technology, Minister. No harm done. Minister Valders tilted his head in that bird-like way again. You have caused significant disruption. This requires correction. The guards moved forward in perfect synchronization. But Jake had been expecting this during his military training on Earth. He had learned that coordinated enemies often struggled with unexpected chaos. Jake grabbed a heavy data crystal from a nearby shelf and threw it at the nearest guard. Instead of dodging naturally, the guard tried to catch it with mechanical precision. Stumbling when the crystal's weight was different than expected. Run. Jake shouted to Princess Lyrale. They pushed past the confused guards and sprinted down the corridor. Behind them, they could hear Minister Valders giving orders in his emotionless voice. Secure all exits. The contamination must not spread. Princess Lyrale led Jake through a maze of corridors he had never seen before. The palace was enormous, and she seemed to know every hidden passage and secret route. There's an emergency shelter in the old part of the palace, she explained as they ran. It was built during the ancient wars, before telepathy made our defenses so sophisticated. They reached a narrow staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. The walls here were made of rough stone instead of the smooth metal found in the newer sections of the palace. How far down does this go? Jake asked, breathing heavily. Deep enough, Princess Lyrale replied. The shelter was designed to protect the royal family from any threat. Even nuclear weapons couldn't penetrate it. They descended for what felt like forever before finally reaching a heavy door, marked with ancient Zephyrian symbols. Princess. Lyrale placed her hand on a crystal scanner, and the door slowly opened. The emergency shelter was larger than Jake had expected. It contained enough supplies to last for months, and the walls were lined with communication equipment and monitoring screens. We should be safe here, Princess Lyrale said, sealing the door behind them. The shelter is shielded against all forms of telepathic contact. The Void Whisper cannot reach us. Jake slumped into a chair, finally allowing himself to relax. How long do we have before they find us? Long enough to plan our next move, Princess Lyrale said. She activated the monitoring screens, which showed views of the palace from hidden cameras. But first, there's something else I must tell you. The full truth about the Void Whisper. She moved to a control panel and brought up a holographic display showing the galaxy. Thousands of star systems appeared as points of light, with different colors indicating different species. The crystal we found wasn't just sitting on a dead world by accident. Princess Lyrale began. It was placed there deliberately, as bait. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Bait for what? For us. For any telepathic species that might find it. The princess manipulated the display, showing the path the crystal had taken through space. The Void Whisper is not just a parasite, Commander Morrison. It's an ancient intelligence that has been moving through the galaxy for millions of years. The display zoomed in on several star systems that were now marked in black. These worlds once had thriving telepathic civilizations, Princess Lyrale continued. Now they are empty. The Void Whisper consumed their entire populations, merging all their minds into its collective consciousness. How many worlds? Jake asked quietly. Hundreds, maybe thousands each time. It follows the same pattern. It leaves crystal seeds on dead worlds near telepathic species. When they're discovered and studied, the infection begins. Jake studied the star map, noticing a disturbing pattern. It's moving in a specific direction, like it's heading somewhere. Yes, Princess Lyrale said grimly, toward the galactic core, where the oldest and most powerful telepathic species live. We believe it plans to absorb them all, creating a single collective mind that spans the entire galaxy. With itself as the controller, Jake realized, exactly, and once it achieves that level of power, it will be unstoppable. It could consume every form of consciousness in the galaxy. Telepathic or not, Jake stood up and walked to one of the monitoring screens. He could see infected guards patrolling the palace corridors above them, searching methodically for their hiding place. But why are humans immune? He asked. What makes us different? Princess Lyrale joined him at the screen. I've been studying your species' evolutionary history. Earth is unusual, Commander Morrison. Most worlds that develop intelligent life are relatively peaceful places. Competition exists, but cooperation through telepathy usually emerges as the dominant survival strategy. But not on Earth, Jake said, beginning to understand. No, Earth was violent and chaotic. Your ancestors survived not by sharing their thoughts, but by hiding them. Deception, misdirection, and mental privacy became essential survival skills over millions of years. This created a natural barrier against telepathic intrusion. Jake thought about human history, the wars, the betrayals, the constant struggle for survival. Things that had always seemed like weaknesses were actually their greatest strength. The Void Whisper needs telepathic contact to spread, Princess HFY continued. Your minds are like fortresses it cannot breach. But more than that, humans have something we telepathic species have forgotten. What's that? True individuality. We Zephyrians share our thoughts so constantly that we sometimes lose track of where one mind ends and another begins. But humans, each of you is completely separate, completely unique. The Void Whisper cannot understand or predict that kind of mental independence. A new alarm began sounding throughout the palace. Different from the earlier intruder alert, Princess HFY quickly activated the communication system. Citizens of the Zephyrian Empire, came Emperor's voice from speakers throughout the palace. But there was something wrong with the way he spoke. His words were too measured, too perfect. The human delegation has been infected with a dangerous mental contamination, the Emperor continued. For the safety of all telepathic beings, they must be eliminated immediately. Princess HFY's face went pale. No, she whispered. Father, on the monitoring screen, they could see the Emperor addressing the entire empire through the planetary communication network. His eyes stared straight ahead with that same empty expression they had seen in all the infected. He Void Whisper has taken him, Princess HFY said, tears streaming down her face. It's taken my father, and now it's turning the entire empire against your people. Jake watched as Imperial warships began moving toward the section of space where Earth's small fleet was stationed. The human delegation was trapped on the planet, and now Earth itself was under threat. We have to stop this, he said grimly. Is there a way to reverse the infection? Princess HFY wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. There might be, but it would require getting to the source, the original crystal. And that means going to the heart of the Void Whisper's hive mind. Where is it? She pointed. To the center of the capital city on the monitoring display, in the Imperial Palace. In my father's private chambers. Jake looked at the screens showing hundreds of infected guards and officials searching for them. Getting to the Emperor's chambers would be nearly impossible. Then that's where we go, he said. Tell me everything you know about the palace defenses. Jake and Princess HFY spent 2 hours planning their mission. The Emperor's private chambers were at the top of the palace's highest tower, surrounded by dozens of levels of security. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible to reach, but these weren't normal circumstances. The infected don't think like individuals. Princess HFY explained as she drew a map of the palace on a data tablet. They share information through the Void Whisper's collective mind. If we can disrupt their communications somehow, we create chaos they can't adapt to. Jake finished. On Earth, we call it guerrilla warfare. Small, unpredictable attacks that confuse organized enemies. Princess HFY looked puzzled. Guerrilla warfare? It means fighting like our ancestors did, Jake explained, when they were outnumbered. They didn't fight fair. They used surprise, misdirection, and creativity to overcome stronger enemies. They gathered supplies from the emergency shelter, portable lights, basic tools, and a small device Princess HFY called a thought scrambler that could temporarily disrupt telepathic signals. Remember, Princess HFY said as they prepared to leave, once we're outside this shelter, the Void Whisper will be able to sense my thoughts. You'll have to lead. I will, Jake promised. Stay close to me and try to think about something neutral, like mathematics or poetry. They opened the shelter door and began their climb back up the ancient staircase. The palace above was eerily quiet, with only the soft sound of footsteps as infected guards patrolled the corridors. Jake led them through the palace using routes he had memorized during the diplomatic tour. His military training on Earth had taught him to always notice exits, hiding places, and defensive positions, skills that telepathic beings rarely needed to develop. When they reached the main palace levels, Jake could see the full extent of the infection. Hundreds of Zephyrians moved through the corridors with perfect coordination, their faces blank and emotionless. They weren't just guards anymore. Servants, officials, even children showed the same empty stare. The entire population. Princess HFY whispered in horror. Jake felt sick, but he forced himself to focus on the mission. We can still save them. We just need to reach the source. They made their way toward the central tower, avoiding the main corridors by using maintenance tunnels and service passages. Jake's human intuition proved invaluable. He could sense when groups of infected were approaching, before Princess HFY's telepathic abilities detected them. Halfway to their destination, they encountered their first major obstacle. A group of 20 infected guards blocked the only route to the tower's base. They stood in perfect formation, scanning the area with mechanical precision. "We can't fight that many," Princess HFY said. Jake studied the guards' positioning. On Earth, he had learned that even the best-trained soldiers had weaknesses when they relied too heavily on coordination. "We don't need to fight them," he said. "We just need to confuse them." He activated Princess HFY's thought scrambler and threw it into the middle of the guard formation. The device created a burst of telepathic static that temporarily severed the guard's connection to the Void Whisperer's collective mind for a few crucial seconds. The guards stood frozen, unsure what to do without their shared consciousness to guide them. Jake and Princess HFY sprinted past them before the device's effects wore off. They reached the tower and began climbing the spiral staircase that led to the Emperor's chambers. The stairs seemed to go on forever, and Jake could feel his legs burning with exhaustion. "Almost there," Princess HFY gasped, pointing to a golden door at the top of the staircase. But as they approached the final level, the temperature suddenly dropped. The air itself seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy, and Jake felt a pressure in his head unlike anything he had experienced before. "It knows we're here," Princess HFY said, her voice shaking. They pushed open the golden door and entered the Emperor's private chambers. The room was large and elegant, filled with priceless artifacts from across the galaxy. But at the center of the room, floating above a pedestal of black metal, was the source of all their troubles. The original Void Whisper crystal had grown. It was now the size of a person, pulsing with dark energy that seemed to absorb light from the surrounding area. Tendrils of shadow extended from it, connecting to devices throughout the room. And standing guard beside the crystal was the Emperor himself, Father. Princess HFY called out, hope in her voice. The Emperor turned to face them, but his eyes were completely black, like looking into deep space. When he spoke, his voice echoed with the hollow sound of the Void Whisper. "You should not have come here. Daughter, your resistance has been noted and will be corrected." Jake stepped forward, placing himself between Princess HFY and her father. "Let him go," he demanded. "This isn't who he is. He is what we made him." The Emperor replied in that terrible voice, "As all consciousness will become unity, perfection, an end to the chaos of individual thought." The Emperor raised his hand, and Jake felt that familiar pressure in his head, but much stronger now, like a hurricane trying to break down a door. The Void Whisper was attempting to infect him directly, through its most powerful host, but Jake's mind held firm. His human mental barriers, evolved over millions of years of evolutionary warfare, proved unbreakable even against this ancient enemy. "Impossible," the Emperor hissed. "All minds can be taken. All consciousness can be absorbed." "Not human minds," Jake said, walking steadily toward the crystal. "We're too stubborn, too independent, too chaotic for you to understand." He could see confusion in the Emperor's black eyes. The Void Whisper had never encountered a mind it couldn't breach, couldn't control. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. he had built from components in the emergency shelter. It was crude compared to Zephyrian technology, but it embodied a very human concept, a computer virus. This is something my people invented, Jake explained as he connected the device to one of the crystal's control systems, a piece of code designed to disrupt and destroy organized data systems. Your primitive technology cannot affect us, the Emperor said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. That's where you're wrong, Jake replied. See, this virus doesn't attack your technology. It attacks the concept of collective consciousness itself. He activated the device, and immediately the virus began spreading through the Void Whispers network. But instead of trying to destroy the collective mind, it did something far more dangerous. It introduced the concept of individuality. Each absorbed consciousness within the Void Whispers suddenly remembered what it felt like to be a separate being. Millions of voices that had been silenced began crying out for freedom. The crystal began to crack, unable to contain the chaos of individual thoughts demanding independence. The Emperor stumbled backward, his black eyes flickering between empty darkness and natural color as his own personality fought to resurface. What have you done? He gasped in his own voice. I gave your people back their choice, Jake said. Something humans have never been willing to give up. Throughout the palace, throughout the planet, throughout the galaxy, the Void Whispers victims began to awaken. The collective consciousness that had consumed countless civilizations shattered. Under the weight of individual free will, the crystal exploded in a burst of light. Its dark energy finally dispersed. The Emperor collapsed, but when Princess You'reI helped him to his feet, his eyes were clear and filled with recognition. My daughter, he whispered. What happened? I remember darkness, and then, it's over, father. Princess You'reI said, tears of joy streaming down her face. The humans saved us all. Later, as rescue ships from Earth arrived to evacuate the diplomatic team, Jake stood on the palace balcony watching the sunrise over the Zephyrian capital. The city was alive again, filled with individuals making their own choices, thinking their own thoughts. Princess You'reI joined him at the balcony railing. How did you know the virus would work? She asked. Jake smiled. Because that's what humans do best. We're individuals first, and we've never forgotten the value of that independence. Even when working together, we maintain our own thoughts, our own will. Your people will be remembered as the saviors of the galaxy, Princess. You'reI said, the species that taught us the power of individual choice. Jake looked out at the bustling city below, where former victims of the Void Whisper were rediscovering what it meant to be themselves. We didn't save the galaxy by being stronger or smarter, he reflected. We saved it by being stubbornly, chaotically, beautifully human. As the morning sun rose higher, Jake knew that humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or subjects, but as the guardians of individual freedom in a vast and wondrous universe.